Kenneth! Kenneth, where is she?
My son, come inside. Come inside first.
I saw them. I saw them get into his car. Somebody tell me what I just saw.
David, listen to me. Do not go out there. Do not let them see you like this.
But Auntie Rose, I have to.
She was just standing beside me. She was just standing right beside me. We just received the blessing. The pastor just blessed us.
I know. I know my son. I saw it too.
He was my best man. He was supposed to be my brother.
Grace had known something was wrong for exactly 43 days. She could not have explained it to anyone who asked, not with any evidence they would have accepted, not with anything she could hold up to the light and say, look, this is it, this is the thing. It was smaller than that. It lived in the spaces between things. The way Rebecca had stopped meeting her eyes at family dinners, the way Kenneth laughed too loudly at his own jokes whenever David left the room, the way Rebecca touched her phone and flipped it face down whenever anyone walked past. Grace had spent her whole life learning to read rooms, learning to listen to the silence under the noise, and what she heard in those 43 days was something she wished she had not heard at all. She did not tell David. She told herself it was because she needed to be sure. She told herself she would not destroy her brother's happiness over a feeling, over a suspicion that could be nothing, over the kind of paranoia that breaks families apart and leaves everyone worse off than before. But if she was being completely honest with herself, and Grace was almost always completely honest with herself, she did not tell David because she was not ready to watch his face when he found out. David was the kind of man who loved with everything. He had loved Rebecca with everything, and Grace knew that the face a man makes when everything is taken from him is a face you cannot unsee. So instead of telling him, she began to prepare. She did not know exactly what she was preparing for. She only knew that when the moment came, if the moment came, she did not want David to be standing in it alone and empty-handed. She started quietly. She began paying closer attention to Kenneth. She asked questions that did not sound like questions. She visited Rebecca's family home in Enugu under the pretext of helping with wedding decorations, and she listened carefully to every conversation in every room she passed through. She was patient. She was methodical. And by the time the wedding invitations had all been sent out, and the hall had been booked in Lekki, and the cake had been ordered from the baker on Admiralty Way, Grace had gathered enough to fill a room. She had call logs. She had a voice recording from a phone left carelessly on a kitchen counter. She had photographs from a source she would never name. She had a conversation screenshotted by a woman Kenneth had wronged 2 years earlier in Port Harcourt, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Grace had packaged everything quietly, organized it the way she organized everything in her life, with precision and without emotion. And she had handed a sealed envelope to a journalist friend 3 days before the wedding, with instructions that were simple. If I call you, open it. If I do not call you by Monday, burn it. She had hoped she would not have to call. She had walked into that church on Saturday morning with the sealed envelope somewhere in the back of her mind and a prayer in the front of it, genuinely hoping that she had been wrong, that the feeling was paranoia, that the 43 days of watching and gathering had been a waste of her time. She had sat in the front pew and watched her brother walk to the altar in his white agbada, his shoulders straight and his face full of a joy so clean it hurt to look at. And she thought, maybe she was wrong. Maybe the world was not always as dark as it appeared from the corners where she liked to stand. Then the church blessing ended, and Rebecca walked toward the side door. Grace had felt the shift before she saw it, the subtle change in the air of the building, the way the organist's music faltered mid-note, the collective intake of breath from 400 guests who all understood at once that something was not supposed to happen. She had turned and watched Rebecca cross the space between the altar and the side door. In 12 steps she counted them, without looking back. She had watched Kenneth move to hold the door open with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this, who knew exactly where he was supposed to stand and what he was supposed to do. And she had watched her brother, her David, the man who loved with everything, go completely still in the way that things go still right before they break. She had crossed to him in 4 steps before his knees gave. And then she had done the thing she had trained herself to do in every crisis she had ever navigated in her 41 years of living. She had felt nothing for herself, and she had focused completely on what needed to happen next. What needed to happen next was this. David needed to leave that church without falling apart in front of 400 people. The guests needed to be thanked and dismissed with as much dignity as the moment could hold. The food that had already been paid for needed to be released to people who could use it, and Grace needed to make one phone call. She managed the first three in under 90 minutes. She was a woman who ran a logistics company in Abuja for 11 years. She understood how to move things. She held David up through the thanking of the guests. She organized the dismissal with the help of 2 cousins she trusted. She instructed the caterers to send the food to the motherless baby's home on the mainland. And she walked her brother out of that church and into the car with his head still on his shoulders. Then she made the phone call. She said 4 words. Open the envelope now. She had not known exactly how far the story would travel. She had known it would travel. Her journalist friend had a platform that reached across Lagos and Abuja and into the diaspora, a newsletter that 70,000 people opened every Monday morning, a social media presence that was followed by people in positions of consequence. She had known that the contents of the envelope would do what evidence always does when it is placed in the right hands. It would speak. She had not known how loudly. By Sunday evening, the story had moved. Kenneth's company found out before he did. He was a senior manager at a real estate firm in Victoria Island, a position he had spent 8 years building, a position that required a certain kind of reputation, the kind of reputation that does not survive a voice recording of you telling someone that you had been sleeping with your best friend's fiancé for 8 months and had helped her plan a wedding exit. The recording was 47 seconds long. It had been shared enough times by Sunday night that his company's communications team was already drafting a statement. Rebecca's family heard through a relative who saw it online before anyone called them. Her father, a retired civil servant in Enugu, who had spent his whole life building a name that meant something in his community, he called Rebecca's phone 11 times between 6 and 8 p.m. on Sunday evening. She did not answer any of them. Her mother, a woman who had cried with happiness when David's family came to ask for her daughter's hand, sat in her sitting room and did not speak for 3 hours. When she finally spoke, she said only one thing, and she said it to no one in particular. I did not raise this child. Kenneth's wife, because Kenneth had a wife, a fact that the envelope also contained, a woman named Helen, lived in Maitama with their 2 children, found out at the same time as everyone else. She was not shocked in the way that people are shocked when they learn something they never suspected. She was shocked in the way that people are shocked when a thing they had suspected for a long time is finally confirmed publicly, and they realize that their silence has been taken for permission. She did not cry. She called a lawyer. By Monday morning, Kenneth's professional email had been deactivated. By Monday afternoon, Rebecca had checked out of the hotel in Lekki, where she and Kenneth had spent one night. One night because by the time Sunday evening arrived, Kenneth was no longer the man who had held the church door open with ease and confidence. He was a man watching everything collapse around him in real time. A man whose phone had not stopped ringing with calls he could not answer. A man who had looked at Rebecca across the hotel room and understood that the plan they had executed so smoothly in that church had not accounted for any of this. They had argued through the night. By morning, they were 2 people who could not stand to be in the same room. Rebecca went to her aunt's house in Surulere. Kenneth went somewhere nobody could immediately locate. David did not know most of this as it happened. Grace had taken him to her house in Abuja, away from Lagos, away from the place where the story was loudest, away from the people who would look at him with that particular combination of pity and curiosity that is one of the most difficult things a wounded person must endure. She had put him in the spare room, and she had brought him food he barely touched, and she had sat with him through the long silences without trying to fill them with words, because Grace understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is simply not leave. On the third day, he asked her how bad it was. She told him the truth, because that was the only thing she knew how to give him. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he asked her one question. He asked her how long she had known. She said 43 days. He looked at her and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that did not need words. The particular understanding between two people who have loved each other their whole lives and know exactly what the other one costs and exactly what the other one is worth. He said, "You could have told me." She said, "I know. I am sorry." He said, "Why didn't you?" She said, "Because I needed you to walk into that church happy, even if it was the last happy morning for a while. I needed you to have that." He did not say anything after that for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different. Not the voice of a man who had been destroyed, but the voice of a man who had begun the very long and very difficult process of deciding not to be. He said, "What happens now?" Grace said, "Now you rest, then you get up, then you live. That is all that is required of you." She meant it as simply as she said it. She had watched enough people survive enough things to know that survival is rarely dramatic. It is mostly just the decision, made again and again, to get up one more time. It is mostly just the next meal and the next morning and the next conversation and the slow accumulation of days until the distance between you and the worst moment of your life is large enough that you can look back at it without it pulling you under. David was not a weak man. He had never been a weak man. He had been a trusting one, which is a different thing entirely, and a more valuable one, though it costs more. He got up. Not immediately, not without the kind of darkness that visits everyone who has been genuinely broken by love, but he got up. He went back to his work in Port Harcourt, where he ran a small construction consultancy that he had built carefully over 6 years. He returned calls, he met clients, he finished a project in Calabar that he had nearly abandoned in the weeks after the wedding. He was thinner than he had been, he was quieter, but he was present. And presence, Grace always said, is the beginning of everything. Kenneth's life had rearranged itself completely by the time Harmattan arrived. The real estate firm had let him go quietly, no scandal in the formal departure, just a mutual agreement and a cleared desk and a handshake that both parties understood was not warm. Helen had filed for divorce and was proceeding with it calmly and without drama, which Kenneth somehow found more difficult than anger would have been. His reputation in the professional circles he had moved through for 8 years had shifted in the way reputations shift when something true and damaging becomes widely known. Not dramatically, not with confrontations, but with the slow withdrawal of opportunities and the gradual cooling of rooms he used to enter with ease. Rebecca had returned to Enugu. Her father had received her at the door of the house she grew up in, and the conversation they had in the sitting room was one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He did not shout. He was not a man who shouted. He simply looked at her for a long time, then told her in the calm voice of a man who has made peace with a grief he did not choose, that she had taken something from herself that she would spend years trying to get back. He told her that a person's name is the thing that walks into a room before them, and that she had sent her name into every room in Nigeria before she had thought about what she was doing. He told her she loved her. He told her she was welcome in his house, and then he went to bed. And Rebecca sat alone in the sitting room of her childhood home and understood for the first time the full weight of what she had done. Not to David, though she had done enough to David, but to herself. She had thrown away a good man on a feeling that had not survived a single night in a hotel room. She had thrown away her name on a plan that had fallen apart before the week was out. She had thrown away the trust of every person who had bought a gift and traveled and sat in that church believing in her, and she could not give any of it back. There is a particular kind of regret that has no remedy, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because some things once done simply cannot be undone, and the living with that is the consequence. David did not see Rebecca for 2 years. When he eventually did at a mutual friend's event in Lagos, briefly across a room, he did not go to her and she did not come to him. They exchanged one look from a distance. Hers carried everything that cannot be said. His carried something she had not expected. Not anger, not coldness, but a settled peace that told her he had survived her completely and built something on the other side of surviving that she was not a part of. That look was harder to carry home than any confrontation would have been. Grace was at that same event. She saw the exchange from across the room. She watched her brother turn back to his conversation, steady and unhurried, and she felt the particular quiet satisfaction of someone who has done a necessary thing and watched it work. She picked up her drink. She said nothing. Some things do not need to be said. David remarried 2 years later, a woman named Blessing, who he met through work, a structural engineer from Ibadan who had her own opinions and her own income and her own way of filling a room that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. They had a small wedding, family only, no best man. Grace gave a toast that made 4 people cry. Life, she said, has a way of returning to the people who do not stop walking. Not what they lost, because lost things rarely come back in the same shape, but something better suited to who they have become. David lost a woman who was never really his. He found a life that was. And that, she told the small room of people who loved him, is not a consolation prize. That is the whole story. She raised her glass. David raised his. And somewhere in Enugu, in a house she had grown up in, Rebecca was having dinner with her parents, quiet, reduced, carrying a future she was slowly learning to accept. And somewhere in a rented flat in Lagos, Kenneth was starting over with less than he had started with the first time, in a city that remembered everything. Some doors close behind you, some close in front of you. The difference is the choice that opened them. If you were Grace, would you have told David the truth 43 days before the wedding, or would you have waited the way she did? Drop your answer in the comments. We want to know what you would have done. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.